Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Xiaofan Jiang, and welcome to today's panel, TechnoMirage, Creative AI Futures. We are truly honored to have our four incredible panelists joining us from across the globe, from New York to Massachusetts, Berlin, and Lisbon. And you'll hear more about their bios and work shortly, but please join me to welcome post-digital artist Joaquina Salgado, Jazsalyn, artist and technologist developing ancestral intelligence, Dominika Čupková, founder of Institute of Machine and Learning, and Ziv Epstein, computer scientist, multimedia artist, and postdoctoral associate at MIT. Feel free to unmute for a second and drop some claps or some emojis in the chat. And next slide, please. So today's panel emerges from a broader event series titled TechnoMirage, and the name gestures toward the illusion of progress often projected by AI, where extractive logics, ghosted authorships, stolen data, and hallucinations of neutrality persist, rendering so many realities invisible. And through this series, we ask, what are we doing with AI at this moment? For whom and under what context? What realities do we use AI to make visible or legible or to obscure? So the TechnoMirage series includes a virtual exhibition titled Ghosts in the Feedback Loop hosted on New York City, an in-person event featuring a panel, a speculative AI role-playing workshop accompanied by an AI-powered new media art showcase and performance, and also today's panel. Next slide, please. This event series was initiated by Underground Art and Design, UAD, a curatorial platform that I founded 3 years ago for artists and designers in movement, in between disciplines, definitions, and beyond prescribed structures. And UAD has sought to offer alternative spaces and micro-infrastructures for artists and creatives to share their work and weave alternative narratives and realities together. And since its founding, UAD has launched 7 virtual exhibitions, 5 in-person new media art shows, 3 online publications, and 5 public programs such as panels and work shares, all focused on expanding how we imagine art, technology, and the future differently. And lastly, I want to thank Julienne and Parsons School of Design Strategies for partnering with us to bring this global virtual panel to life. And now I'll hand it over to my co-host Julienne, who will introduce herself and her course at Parsons.
Thanks so much, Xiaofan. Hey, everybody, and welcome. As Xiaofan just mentioned, my name is Julienne DeVita. I'm a part-time faculty member here at Parsons, where I teach different courses that intersect creative artificial intelligence and future studies. Today, we are diving into a session I'm so excited. This is a part of my undergraduate Design with AI course, which brings together an incredibly interdisciplinary group of undergrad students from all different majors and different years at Parsons. All of my students today are actually here on this Zoom call, and we will hear from 4 of them, Casey, Marlene, Elle, and Victoria today, later on during the Q&A. So a little bit about this Design with AI course that I teach that's hosting this session. We explore 3 big themes. First, we introduce the vast landscape of creative AI, getting really hands-on with learning these tools. Next, we begin unpacking the ethical and responsible dimensions of integrating AI into creative practice and process. And finally, the last part of the course, we consider the human role in shaping AI's future. And so that journey, especially the end of that journey, is what frames our panel today on Creative AI Futures. I'm thrilled to be co-hosting this conversation alongside Underground Art and Design. Huge thanks to the team. And of course, a big thank you to our panelists. We cannot wait to hear your insights. So without further ado, let's start by introducing our first guest, Joaquina Salgado. Joaquina is a Berlin-based post-digital artist whose practice explores the tangled relationships between technology, the human body, and digital consciousness. Working at the intersection of art and science, she creates interactive installations, interfaces, virtual environments, and audiovisual performances that interrogate identity, memory, and perception within technological systems. Over to you, Joaquina.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. So yeah, my name is Joaquina. I'm a media artist working with emerging technologies. And yeah, my mediums these days are video games, installation, interfaces, and audiovisual performances as well. These days, I'm mostly thinking about these intersections of internet culture and philosophy, and also philosophy of science. In this sense, I think it's more precise to say that it's the speculative, right? Like constructing scenarios and artifacts that to talk about this post-internet condition and encourage reflection on how technology might enable more equitable and interconnected futures with a queer feminist lens always, right? So next slide. So I frame my practice inside of the post-digital, meaning that I work with techniques and ideas that originate from a digital core or post-internet, and then I expand to other medium, connecting with materialities, sensors, and bodies in many times. I work a lot with video games. These video games as non-linear narratives and that kind of open doors to these affective landscapes, and also installations that use sensors to kind of compose in real time with the idea of stepping outside the screen without abandoning entirely the digital, understanding that the materiality of the digital is not limited to the screen, right? So what happens is that from the perspective of digital artwork, sometimes the real world can seem kind of distant. Often this relationship we establish with these pieces makes us feel that we are kind of remembering the future, right? Like a nostalgic gesture towards something that will never happen. So it's like remembering the future. So screens in this context have become intimate. They are company to us. They preserve memories. They shape atmospheres, and also they make us feel that the body is not longer entirely there. So yeah, for example, this is in where what I'm showing at the moment is in virtual reality work, and it was accompanied by a physical installation with objects that were resembling what was happening inside of the digital space, right? But it's not the other way around. So first the digital and then kind of the physical one. Yeah, so in this sense, what I do, my main tools are like game engine softwares, and what I do is like kind of world building or worlding practices. This world building practice originates with the motivation to encourage the thinking of out of hypothetical worlds with different physical laws, and also yeah, examining this capacity of dreaming speculative. For this, the creative process always involves a lot the use of AI. Many times when the world building is happening, when I'm working on it, we need a lot of assets to create a level, or yeah, to create 3D designs, right? Or even sounds. And mostly, if you're working as a solo developer, you're like really AI can help us to iterate a lot more in this process. Of course, the question is always how to use these tools. Sometimes the AI is used directly as a technical kind of workflow. Some other times the AI is more incorporated from the idea of how we relate with the machine, right? So in this idea of the use of AI is reflected through the mix of images that are in the collective imaginary. So in this sense, the idea of post-internet and post-digitality as this kind of state of nostalgia of everything that we experienced online is directly linked on the way that AI operates somehow in this collecting of memories. In this case, this was in this slide. This was like a world, like a level design, and it was projected like in real time in a dome. And it was, of course, it was not interactive, but yeah, it was experienced right there, like in real time. Okay. So I'm gonna introduce two specific works. One is this one, A Speech, which is actually showing in the exhibition of Ghost in the feedback loop. Sometimes it's not only about using AI as a tool, but to reflect some implications or reflections on consequences as in the real world, but using a fantasy context. So sometimes it's that like the use of science fiction, um, to take some science facts and kind of making a narrative, a fantasy narrative around it. So this specific project, A Speech, was born as response to police violence against a demonstration in a European country during International Women's Day 2 years ago. I was there in the demonstration, and together with other women, we were kind of subjected to unjustified aggression, and we engaged on this anonymous conversation about these experiences. And this specific experience became the foundation of the piece. Because during the protest, we were forced to pass through this kind of police checkpoint where our data was collected using facial capture techniques. And this kind of sparked me to think about the bias of the AI, the problems of the bias of AI. And I was at the same time using this motion capture technique to animate characters. So I thought, okay, why not to collect this anonymous experience about how the bodies experience the violence and the power dynamics through this fantasy context. I have a. So in the end, was looking like this. So the same kind of technology used in the repression, I used it to document and reanimate these experiences. The capture data then it was transferred into a digital character, creating this installation of 4 screens, each one displaying a different version of the entity. So in this case, these are 2 different outputs of the same artwork. The first one is like the physical one. The first time was exhibited in Switzerland 2 years ago, and now is showing kind of a bit of a new version of it in the online exhibition, which is very cool to see. And there is always the question around like, okay, how do we translate something that was born digital, but then it was mounted on a physical kind of setup, but then going back to digital as an installation. So for me, it was very interesting to kind of to explore. So yeah, in this case, AI was used more as not so much as a technical process, but more like to think the implications of those, right? This is only one way to do it. There are infinite ways to implicate with AI. Okay, so this second project that I wanted to share, it's called To the Best of Our Knowledge. And this is okay. This is a video game. And basically the idea, the narrative was a narrative unfolding by imagining the collapse between AI technology and quantum technologies. I developed this with a group of scientists in Spain that they provided with some input around quantum computers, and we were imagining how this collapse would happen, no, like AI with quantum. From the idea itself, it was like a non-linear story set in a library containing all of the information ever written by humans, like the AI resembling the accumulation of data, and the information was at the same time existing all at the same time and in the same place, but at the same time. So, and the moment you open one of the books, it stops being something specific, right? So the character must kind of navigate through endless bookshelves that generates in real time. And the world structure was driven by this procedurally generated level. And so in this case, the use of AI was not only from the idea itself or of how the narrative was unfolding, but also from the technical perspective, because all of the library and all of the assets were made with AI, meaning that it was like it was resembling in different ways, right? So I think this kind of idea of creating science fiction through video games is really cool to engage with these technologies, to kind of think about them, to think with others, and yes, I think it's a really cool playground and really cool medium to develop this kind of aesthetics. And yes, this speculation is characterized by both by you can kind of react to the complexity of everything that is happening around us in terms of the AI. So in this way, we can kind of generate some kind of distance from the reality and generate a representation. And this speculative activity becomes somehow a way of producing critical knowledge, no? So yeah, this is kind of what I do, I think. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Joaquina. So up next, we will hear from Jazsalyn. Jazsalyn is an artist and technologist developing ancestral intelligence since 2020, a framework exploring alternative AI and early forms of knowledge systems, philosophies, and traditions passed down through generations within indigenous and diasporic communities. Her work has been supported by Serpentine Arts Technologies, New Museum, Pioneer Works, Creative Time, and more. She has lectured at institutions including Harvard University and has been featured in publications such as Contemporary End, Cultured Magazine, It's Nice That, Vogue, and The New Yorker. Let's welcome Jazsalyn.
Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so in addition to everything that you just said, I'm also a DT alum, class of 2021. Yeah, and I'm happy to be here. You know, it feels like full circle coming home to share how much my practice has grown since graduating from the MFA program at DT. So in regard to ancestral intelligence, we first have to ask ourselves what exactly is intelligence? And this is a question that most people are still working to define. Even AI developers struggle to define the concept of quote unquote intelligence or how the human mind and brain actually functions. So this leads us to wonder what exactly is AI? How can tech companies simulate intelligence into artificial intelligence systems if they don't fully understand at a base level human intelligence? As of now, AI is just a marketing term to sell us something that we didn't necessarily ask for or sign up for. Um, Karen Howe is an author and reporter covering societal impacts of AI, and her best-selling novel, Empire of AI, um, which reveals that current AI that we currently interface with on a day-to-day basis, like Gemini or ChatGPT, doesn't actually mean anything, as in it isn't the real artificial intelligence or simulating quote unquote intelligence the way that early AI researchers intended it to. Instead, these tech companies are just using the term AI to loosely lure in investors. So this leads us to ask, is AI just a scam or is it tech bro vibes trying to cash out and then crash out at the expense of our own livelihoods and the planet? Um, what is the alternative to this? What is alternative AI? This brings us back to the beginning with ancestral intelligence, the real AI. And through my practice, I refer to ancestral intelligence as mentioned before, the earliest forms of knowledge systems, philosophies, and traditions that are passed down within generations. And then also considering like, that within indigenous groups, um, and also within the descendants and their diasporic communities. Ancestral intelligence also is considering interconnectedness between all forms of life and intelligence, such as fauna to flora, animal to human, and furthermore, ancestral intelligence asks how do you coexist with the emergence of new intelligence, such as machine intelligence. And so furthermore, this leads me to ask, how do you define an ancestor? Do you consider an ancestor to be human or non-human or both? Um, and to try to answer this, we have to zoom out and go to space-time. You're only a tiny part of a huge incoherent body within the universal totality. So instead of asking, do you believe in aliens? Maybe you should ask, do aliens believe in you? This is also a quote from one of my favorite songs by Erykah Badu, trying to save the world, where in the world it's all the time. And so this leads to my work and the questions that I've been asking, in addition to all the previous questions that I mentioned in the previous slides, about the origin of life within the universe, ancestral and cosmic technologies, and how can we recover traces of ancestral intelligence? How can we use spatial environments like game engines as a tool to reimagine and channel ancestral memory? So traveling deeper into the cosmos, on screen is a video of Mars from NASA rover missions. Reimagined Prototype, RPX for short, is a multi-channel video installation and long-term computational study that I actually started while I was a student in DT. It's an attempt to try to refigure lost indigenous and extraterrestrial memory. RPX applies machine learning and computer vision to juxtapose and regenerate data archives of African artifacts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and data collected from various landscapes of Mars from NASA rover missions. In this work, I'm considering African artifacts that have been displaced from their place of origin and parallel to the colonization of space. And so this was actually like one of my early experiments working with Python, algorithmic processes. And what I found interesting about this experiment was that with this data from Mars and from the continent, when it merges, the machine is, it feels like it's trying to regenerate these images. And it also kind of creates this eerie effect of what feels like a memory attempting to take form, but it's yet complete. Instead of just like it's fragmented of what has been lost and displaced. This is also early GAN animations before the commercialization of the quote unquote, again, AI that we currently interface with. And this is another quote by Octavia Butler. The universe is God's seed, only we are Earth's seed, and the destiny of Earth's seed is to take root among the stars. So this is a more recent ancestral intelligent project called Explora, and it is an augmented reality installation exploring ancestral intelligence of the Gullah Geechee corridor, which is a coastal region stretching from North Carolina to Florida, where West and Central African descendants fled post-slavery to reserve ancestral knowledge systems, rituals, and traditions. A spore refers to the root term spore or seed in diaspora. The digital landscape of a spora, it renders microscopic imagery of indigenous African plant species, transforming the corridor through collage, AI, and 3D simulation technologies. Referring to my Afro-Carolinian lineage, the work itself carries histories to communities within my hometown. And each scene visualizes the significance of ancestral agriculture, again, ancestral intelligence on contemporary textile practices, and also considering and embracing the regenerative capacity of various organisms, knowledge systems, and African practices. Also thinking about, tying that into how ancestral intelligence, the real AI, is regenerative instead of extractive. So Natal Dimension is a ongoing ancestral intelligence project, and it's a cinematic game experience that travels across pre-colonial Africa to recover traces of ancestral intelligence. Um, this is a multi-format experience that's merging archival research and speculative fiction to try to imagine an alternate reality where indigenous knowledge systems inform more sustainable models for AI and contemporary technologies. God is only visible through our neighbors. Our existence creates God's existence. I see the God in you. This quote from the African cosmology of the Bantu Congo speaks to our intertwined liberation and state of being. On screen is a graphic of the Congo cosmogram from this book, which is also referred to as Dekinga. And the Congogram represents the cycle of ancestralization, the cycle of physical and the spiritual world, which involves dying and being reborn as an ancestor. And it emphasizes this continuous cycle of existence, considering death not as an endpoint, but as a point of transformation and renewal. So when I think of ancestral memory, I'm also considering, what has been lost, but also what can be restored. And this is what I refer to as spirit work. My practice is a ritual, and through my practice, I am searching to heal. And this is both on a personal level, but extending beyond myself and, considering my ancestors. And also that experience of loss across generations, being displaced from a land that we were indigenous to. So on the next slide, I'll play a brief treatment that I created to gain further support for natal dimension, which I've been developing in Unreal Game Engine. Are you?
I think you have to stay off mute, Jazsalyn.
So you stuck in a future separate from a past? Oh no, so you couldn't hear that? I'll run it back. Are you afraid to die? Are you even alive? Or are parts of you stuck in a future separate from a past you can't see? My name is Jazsalyn. I am the creator of Natal Dimension, a cinematic game experience that travels through different eras in African history to recover the original AI, ancestral intelligence. Natal Dimension is a multi-chapter experience developed in Unreal Engine. The first chapter is a 10-minute journey that can be presented as either a short film or a single-player installation. The prototype on screen took over 200 hours to develop. We need over 500 hours to complete the chapter. As we enter Natal Dimension, our journey begins in space. We navigate the amorphous balls of the Nebula Series B. Through an out-of-body experience, we confront death. In contact with cosmic forces, we are reborn. Cradle, the first chapter of Natal Dimension, begins in identical depression in Ethiopia, also known as the Cradle of Life. It explores the Hell mythology, drawing parallels to the region, the astronomy of the Dogon of Mali, and the creation of Earth life through cosmic contact. As a part of the Natal Dimension experience, artifacts as ancestral technology, serve as keys within the game environment, opening hidden dimensions to channel ancestral memory. Ancestral intelligence refers to knowledge systems with respect and interconnectedness between human and non-human life forms. Due to centuries of genocide and colonization, our current reality discredits indigenous knowledge and origins of technology. Through Natal Dimension, I'm creating a space to envision a reality based in indigenous knowledge and history, as many origins of current technologies have already existed. There's a breadth of knowledge that could shed light on what we make today, such as new AI models, considering human life in its fullness and how we are further connected to this planet and other species. So in addition to the ancestral intelligence projects in my solo practice, I also organize a curatorial project called Black Beyond, which I started also at DT. It's my thesis. And it's also where anti-disciplinary artists imagine alternate realities for Blackness and emergent technologies like AI. Through Black Beyond, I've curated social experiences and special projects with Serpentine Arts Technology, the New Museum, New Ink, Pioneer Works, Onassis, Onyx, just to name a few. Exhibitions exploring the complexities of various Black meta-theories here at Parsons in the Kellen Gallery, and a hybrid festival reimagining Black film futures through virtual performance, workshops, and new media art. Actually, the virtual experience was on New Art City as well, and expanded into various locations throughout New York. And Warp Mode, which is a recent project in a counter-future world-building toolkit in the format of a card game. Warp Mode is about bringing people together, friends and strangers, to shapeshift and warp reality through mind-bending calls to action. Inside of the toolkit are 40 prompt-based cards, inviting diverse audiences to consider multidimensional layers of Blackness and its capacity to imagine unforeseeable futures, to overcome previous cycles of apocalypse and current existential threats facing humanity. Black meta theory cards inside of the kit include Afropocalypse, Afrovoidism, Afro-Nowism, and the most popular Afrofuturism. So if any of these ideas inspire you, please do keep in touch and reach out, especially if you want to talk in more depth about ancestral intelligence or any of the other projects that I mentioned. All my info is in my bio via Instagram at Jazsalyn.
Thank you very much, Jazsalyn. Next up, I'd like to introduce Dominika Čupková. Dominika is an interdisciplinary artist and researcher connecting the dots between AI, art, design, and technology through a feminist lens. A doctoral student at the Academy of Fine Arts and Design in Bratislava, she was a 2024 and 25 visiting artist researcher at the Interactive Technologies Institute at the University of Lisbon. Dominika also founded the Institute of Machine Unlearning, a para-academic platform reimagining our relationship with AI, and co-founded Ladies, Wine, and Design Slovakia, supporting women in the creative fields. Dominika, over to you.
Okay, so, well, I'm Dominika, I'm an artist and a researcher, currently finishing my last year of PhD at the Academy of Fine Arts in Slovakia, but now I'm saying hi from Portugal, where I'm still based. And I was part of University of Lisbon, but now I'm a part of this collective Mais Um no Mais which does socially engaged art. And I'm also from the internet, and the internet I'm from was AIX Design for the past 2.5 years, where I was partaking on comms and research. But why we are here today, I guess it's the Institute of Machine Unlearning, which is partly internet and partly real life. So this summer I founded Institute of Machine Unlearning as this sort of fictional, but now very much real structure that hosts workshops that explore relationship with technology and mostly plot twist without technology. And because for the past 2 to 3 years, I was leading these workshops and it was always under my name. And I just thought I want to do more of this and I don't want it to be about me. So I founded this institute, and workshops usually revolve around the technology and AI, but it is not about learning to use any tools. It's more about examining our relationship with it and maybe also to give participants some mental tools and hold space from everything in between AI doom and hype. And today I want to give you an overview of 3 workshops that I workshop by. One of them, just to honor the roots, one of them is this, like I would say, OG workshop that I started all of these, was this one, Girl AI, Playful Subversion with AI and Design, that accidentally toured to all sorts of venues around Europe. And after I did this like dozens of times with around 100 people passing through these sessions, it started to be more and more visible, but not super obvious from the beginning to me that workshops are becoming my practice, which is funny and scary also because I didn't know many people around or in my close proximity that where the workshops is the main thing, not just like a byproduct of a practice. And I'm sure they exist, but if you know anyone, please send them my way. So I also wrote a paper on these early workshops recently that will go open source soon, and that summarizes findings of these initial sessions in whatever way possible is really to summarize such thing that is happening in the real life. But also like it talks a bit more about how playful subversion can give us some sense of agency, or how it can be a source of reclaiming agency through sort of staying with the trouble with strangers in a workshop, sort of real-time prototyping. What could we do? Not only imagine, but trying to craft the worlds we cannot live without. And as well, not the biggest fan of academic writing, but if we do not sneak weird things in there, then they will not be here. So this will be available soon as well, like that you can find out what was happening. But while being in the AIX design, we had this collaboration with Sound and Vision Netherlands, an organization called Better Images of AI, where we try to get to the root of a problem of visual communication of AI. Because as you may have noticed, current imagery is not really giving, or is it giving sort of unrealistic vibe? So we were pondering, if not this, if the current images are not giving, then what? What could better images of AI look like? And we pondered quite hard, and there were artist commission, participatory sessions, and we ended up publishing a playbook for anyone to be able to create their own images of AI if they need so, and especially if they are thinking they would not be able to do so, or that they would not consider themselves creatives or artists or any sort. And of course, to test everything, we threw a workshop, and finally, besides the online workshops, also in real life on the AX Design Festival. And it seems to somehow work because collage or these image making techniques are by nature nonlinear and embodied, and also memory driven. And so there is something missing. Sorry. So they are somehow surfacing something from us that we may not even understand, or we cannot put into words. And as we did this workshop in the festival, and so somehow I left AX Design like as an active member and started the festival, I still adopted this sort of workshop to my practice now. And I'm gonna show you some of the vibes, how it looks like, or like what you can imagine, because also it's very hard to just speak about those things. Okay, so now, back, I hope it's sharing. So as I was saying, unlike the smooth and sterile aesthetics of AI marketing, collage looks more like how we actually experience technology. Sometimes it's uneven, oftentimes messy and rather intimate, leaking into our language, habits, and relationships. So these are just some results that participants in the workshop managed to do with the short time we had together, and to share whatever we experience on the workshop. Institute is publishing a small zine with the results and lingering questions of what we talked about together, and as a way to share with people who could not be in the room with us as well. So, and let me show you one more workshop. Hopefully it all works out, which I think for what these workshops are, this is a peak of a critical play, which you're gonna see. It explores more around the ideas around the question, what does it mean to be human in the era of omnipresent technologies? And it includes also a little serious game, and I make people move a lot. The game is a variation of a werewolf game, but about bots. At one point, it always looks like we are starting a cult or a huge therapy session, but actually it's a lot of fun. I'm just putting here the proofs of fun because just so you believe me. But if you have ever been on the internet for more than 5 minutes, you have probably encountered CAPTCHA, which is this test where you are proving your humanity or that you are not a robot by choosing squares on the screen. And this has one big problem, that is preventing blind and visually impaired people from accessing the protected resource. And besides obvious problem, CAPTCHAs are also a form of surveillance by consent, because they track how humans think and behave without us realizing that our input is helping to refine AI systems. And also what sounds like a problem to me in this was that the human experience is simplified into the binary terms in AI systems, and often reducing complex identities into yes and no answers. And while some people are not passing these tests, AI is passing it now, like ChatGPT pretended to be blind and tricked human into solving a CAPTCHA. So this is not very cool. Maybe for AI to pass a CAPTCHA, I imagine more like it to be this way, like young robot stays up all night preparing for his Turing tests. But why am I explaining all of this is that in the workshop, we troubled this algorithmic gaze a bit, and we trouble it by going outside, by walking, by gathering images from surrounding environment, which then each participant owns their own data set to play with. And what we play with is this app that I designed with my friend, that you can choose from sets of weirder prompts and create your own CAPTCHAs. Also gonna provide vibes as well. Let's pray that this works. And so we have also in this workshop 20 minutes of screen time, which is also funny because I'm trying to avoid this at any cost. But sometimes we need those master tools to use them for our own purposes. So after the screen time, it's the playtime. And in the playtime, everyone is trying to guess try to pass the test, humanity test, which is of course impossible to pass because all of us are very different. And this is how some of the results of the participant look like. And also for those of you who know How to with John Wilson, I started to see those workshops or this walking time as like people get to have their own episode on those walks, noticing things, because the results are very, I don't know, I'm always very amazed what people see when they actually start notice. So, and why am I also saying all of this? One of this workshop, particularly the captured one, is supposed to be tied to the interactive artwork that I'm creating at this year and the next year. And it's going to be the artwork where you can actually play those captchas, but of course you can never win because there is like, you cannot prove your humanity in this way. You can only give up. And yeah, that's also, there is more workshops, but I just wanted to like zoom on these 3 ones. So if you are ever interested to play together or like have a nice time in your school or in your birthday party, you can call me. And thank you so much for this opportunity to show this weird work.
Thank you so much, Dominika. I also love how that connects to some of the points we'll hear from Ziv. So up next, Ziv Epstein is an American multimedia artist and computer scientist whose work explores critical world building and human agency in the era of artificial intelligence. His projects have been shown at Ars Electronica, New York City, the Vienna Museum of Technology, and MIT Museum in Burning Man, and have been featured in the New York Times, Scientific American, and NPR. I'll hand it over to you, Ziv.
Thanks so much. Let's share. Can you guys see this? Fantastic. Okay, so it's great to be here with everyone. Very excited to share some thoughts. I figured that, given the nature of the class and a lot of the questions y'all have, I'm very happy to share a bit of an overview of my work, but I also figured it'd be a great opportunity to share some of the latest thoughts and kind of conceptual tools and metaphors that have really shaped my own thinking about exploring AI and creativity. So I figured I would kind of just run through that as well as talking about my own work as a way to kind of open us up for conversation. So, I think we all know how generative AI has a rapid potential to transform creative production by allowing the rapid creation of media with very little human input. And we've seen filmmakers, putting halt on big expansions after seeing the capabilities of these AI models and concerns of art theft, as well as the energy demands of these models, and these recent concerns of kind of AI slop, leading to a world where essentially a lot of creative production is automated and we get low quality slop and artists and creatives don't get paid. So that's kind of a really scary landscape that we find ourselves in when we think about AI. And a lot of people like to think about historical analogs for this moment of techno shock. And a classic one is the Second Industrial Revolution and how photography as a new technology impacted the creative work. In particular, painters actually considered photography to be the death of art, right? That it would actually kill our ability to make. But, it ended up transforming artistic production where, painters were no longer bound to reality and were kind of unchained to go explore abstractionism and surrealism, and ultimately had complex effects on labor. Portraiturists were out of the job, but ultimately portrait photographers became this new kind of industry. People like to talk about this analogy, but ultimately it's a pretty outdated and limited analogy, particularly because photography is a chemical process kind of representing and capturing some elements of reality. But with generative AI, we have these hegemonic bias representations that become encoded due to the training data. And the training data completely changes the game. To give you an example of this, we have a project called Meet the Ganimals, which is essentially this platform to kind of breed and generate AI-generated hybrid animals. So here's what happens when you blend a goldfish and a golden retriever to create a golden fufa here. In this platform, it's all animal pairs that we're blending and, creating these hybrids. But we kept seeing these like weird hybrid nightmare monsters that were appearing on our platform. And we were so confused about what animals were actually in the training data that would allow for these kind of nightmare creatures. And when we took a look under the hood, what we found is that all of these animals are half barracuda, which some of you might know is a fish that's actually a prized trophy fish. And if you actually you Google barracuda or look at the images in the training data, you see that a lot of times it's actually people holding up their prized fish, highlighting some of the cultural assumptions and biases that actually then get reified into our projects and create these kind of nightmare creatures. And we're seeing this now with creative production, where if I ask, DALL-E 2, say, to create a visual portrait of San Francisco, but then I ask it to, do the same thing, but to be creative, what we get is, Van Gogh's Starry Night above San Francisco. And, Van Gogh is perhaps one of the most cliche, artists in Western Canada at this point. So when we ask these models to be creative, they actually backfire in these tremendous ways. And that's resulted in a world where people and individuals can use Gen AI to go further faster and kind of churn out this kind of content, but it comes at the cost of collective diversity. All of the stuff that we're seeing is looking the same, and people aren't feeling a sense of ownership. And we're seeing this kind of large amount of convergent scientific evidence of these homogenization effects of generative AI. So where does creative agency and choice lie? How do we kind of think about this? I want to talk a little bit about one historical tradition of artists who really wrestled with these questions of creative agency and choice. And in particular, they were thinking about randomness. And this is, talking about like the surrealists and the Dadaists who, after experiencing the whirls of World War I, essentially kind of rejected rationality and sought to kind of look for nonsense and randomness as a way to guide their art. And so we see kind of early examples of people turning to torn paper and where it falls and drawing that, or actually using sortition, such as in Ellsworth Kelly's scene, to actually randomly draw lots to figure out how to draw this painting of the River Seine. And we also see kind of examples of Ellsworth Kelly here permuting all of the possible combination of these tiles to do the representation of all the different colors that actually match. But we see cracks start to appear when these artists, conceptual artists, are thinking about randomness. And here, for Ellsworth Kelly, he actually looked at all of these different possibilities for this red, yellow, blue, white, and black with white, and actually said that after making the collage of variations, I decided the original configuration of the finished painting was my best and only solution for the painting. So rather than randomness for randomness' sake, kind of relinquishing control and agency to the random process, here Kelly is actually taking a stand and deciding that actually there's a single realization of this process that is actually fitting his sensibilities and his choice of what is kind of the correct solution to the artwork. So how does that work with AI? Under this view, right, we're seeing that artists could actually curate their sensibilities through serendipitous encounters with randomness. So does that give us a way to think about how we encounter AI as creatives? Unfortunately, modern AI falls short because it's actually not random. Historically, these models have been called stochastic parrots, talking about their kind of randomness. But actually, and this was actually true, where text generation was commonly using randomness as a way to kind of combat problems with these systems like neural degeneracy. But recently, more randomness has actually been stamped out of these models in service of convergent goals like factuality and safety with tools like reinforcement learning with human feedback. So instead of getting stochastic parrots, we're getting monoculture parrots. And so this raises the question of what is a working model of how we think about AI and how it's used in concert with randomness in the kind of sacred human project of meaning making. To explore this, I want to share one quick study that we explored how people essentially find meaning and resonance in randomness. And this is actually thinking about divination, which is a system of looking for meaning in randomness. And how people use these tools to make meaning. And we were really interested in how recent folks are actually turning to generative AI. They'll pull a card from tarot and then turn to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what the card means in the context, right? And so we actually conducted an interview study with 12 different tarot practitioners who are using AI in their tarot divination practice. And we found a series of ways that they're actually using these tools, such as streamlining and expanding the practice of divination, finding empowerments to navigate challenges and uncertainties, and actually finding ways to look at new perspectives that they might not have considered otherwise. And we actually found a lot of this lines up with kind of classical theories of resonance and how people are finding resonance within and outside of themselves in these contexts. And across the board, we're finding that rather than delegating meaning making to AI, a lot of our participants are actually using AI as a tool to find resonant meaning in their divination. So in light of this, I want to kind of turn our attention back to the second industrial revolution. But instead of focusing on photography, I think there's actually these kind of larger social shifts that are happening, right? Parallel to photography, we see other technology like the telegraph and electricity, and how these are co-evolving and fueling broader social movements. In particular, spiritualism is this kind of religious and social movement concerned with the afterlife, with boasted, almost 10 million folks in the US in the turn of the 19th century. And interestingly, with spiritualism, it's actually democratizing spirituality because of its focus on an individual's ability to encounter spiritual phenomenon. So in contrast to institutionalized religion that oftentimes had an ordained and male authority mediating this relationship with God or spirit, it actually offered people, and women in particular, a direct contact with spiritual forces, and in turn was a site for women gaining a voice in the public domain, and being these spirit mediums, which was in many cases the first time that these folks were having a voice in public. And actually, as a result, kind of dovetailed with the suffragette movement, where a lot of prominent suffragettes got their start as spirit mediums. And Shannon Taggart famously says, "Many have told me that mediumship is simply a matter of taking your imagination seriously." So when we think about seances, we turn to Hilma af Klint, this kind of visionary Swedish painter who was actually doing seances every Friday night to get inspiration for her work. And where she said is, "What I needed was courage, and it was granted to me through the spiritual world, which bestowed rare and wonderful instruction." So when we think about this question of AI as a medium, if you Google AI seance, you'll see a lot of these claims of companies that will perform a seance on your dead loved ones, which I think is kind of egregious and unethical. So here, we're interested in recasting AI as a hermeneutic technology that presents us with prompts for reflections, not answers. So in a work that's featured in Ghost in the Feedback Loop, we're actually exploring how we can use prompting to engage in these performances of seance. But ultimately, we are ultimately interested in giving the model prompts and the output images being prompts for us that are collectively reflecting this meaning. So that's what AI seance is. We also have a paper on it. And here the magic is not in the machine's power, but rather about the human power to create shared meaning through collective interpretation. And here the use of generative AI is kind of underscoring that when you're doing it for creativity, it must be centered in critical interpretation of generated media, and works when people come together to co-create understanding and share their experiences. So in summary, wrapping this up and kind of transitioning to some of the questions, ultimately AI is a cliche or pastiche machine, and this is extremely dangerous for creative production, and there's lots of harms. And at the same time, it can be generative when we treat this machine as prompts for reflection. And ultimately, randomness is a powerful muse for breaking biases and seeing outside of what our own perspectives are that humans have used forever to kind of make art, and is a site where conceptual artists have navigated similar tensions of control and agency. And I'll note that now current generative AI systems aren't actually random in the way we might like when we think about creative production. And ultimately, a core element of the creative process is making decisions that meaningfully express intent. And now in the age of generative AI, it's more important than ever to find your voice and style. So thanks so much, and excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Ziv, and all really wonderful insights. I have a lot of questions. I know folks in the audience probably do as well. We're going to transition now into some student-led Q&A. Really excited to hear your perspective. And I believe our first student is Casey, who will be asking a question to, I think, all the panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Casey, and I'm a third-year student at Parsons School of Design studying fashion design. My question for all four panelists today is, when we think about the future of creative labor, it's easy to get caught up in fears around job loss, loss of craft, or issues of copyright and ownership in training data. What's your vision for a preferable future of creative work? And what advice would you give to emerging creatives who are feeling that uncertainty?
I guess I can start since I was just talking maybe a little bit about this. So ultimately, I think that these are very dark technologies that have a lot of kind of harms for society and for creativity. So ultimately, we need to think about like the ways to use them that essentially empowers people's voices and perspectives. And so there, I think it's always artists who are the vanguards of new technologies. Whenever there's something new coming along, artists are the ones who are engaging critically with it and understanding what is that kind of deep thread of kind of human understanding and connection. And so ultimately, that darkness can be very like generative as something to kind of critique or to kind of be in dialogue with. I think that kind of the myopic use of these tools in naive ways runs into these kind of harms of monoculture, but ultimately, through a lot of the practices of, I think, a lot of the panelists here, like there's ways to actually break out of that prism and to kind of have a more critical interaction with these models.
I was just
If I can.
Oh,
Sorry.
mine is really quick. So I was just going to say in response to the technologies being dark, I don't think the technology is dark. I think the tech companies are dark. And yeah, it's not the technology, it's who is how they're constructing the way we interface with it, how they're building the technologies. And so this goes back to how to break up big tech and what what type of quote unquote AI tools are you using? How are you diversifying the type of AI tools you're using? Um, Maybe instead of like, using AI tools that are quote unquote on the cloud, online, maybe using like a local large language model. Yeah, just thinking about how you are interfacing with the tech because you can't necessarily opt out. I think that comes up in a question later. Like it's becoming so ingrained into just you might try to do a Google search and it's there, but I think even DuckDuckGo is using it now. So, yeah, finding a way to break up how like big tech, which companies you're interfacing with.
I could add to add that there are many ways, as Ziv said before, like to engage with AI. Like one of those could be maybe try to incorporate open source models into our workflow or some kind of workflow that gives us a bit more of freedom of creation. It's not the same, prompting to Midjourney or downloading Stable Diffusion, creating a LoRa, or being able to create a specific workflow in an interface as Comfy UI, which gives you way more kind of flexibility to think on a workflow for itself, so it doesn't at least look so generative or repetitive as everything else. Yeah.
I think these are all very good advices, and I would maybe just like to add to them is that now is the time of monsters. Be weird as much as you can. Like all of these weird projects coming out of closet right now, it's the time to do that because AI is flattening the weirdness. Everything looks the same. So like you can really go to all the corners and maybe do not try to produce in line with whatever is on trend maybe. And really one coming from the practice is that just go and touch grass, be with people, and seek inspiration in different places than your normal area. I mean, this could sound very generic, but I think it's still on point and still gonna be even more on point because as we're gonna be flooded with all this AI slop, where are we gonna look for what feeds us actually?
Thank you.
Jazsalyn put in the chat little monsters to work against the big monsters. So shall we transition into our next student question?
Yeah, I think that's Marlene. Floor's yours, Marlene.
So, hi, my name's Marlene. I'm a senior student at Parsons studying integrated design. And my question is for Jazsalyn and Joaquina. How much of your creative process involves AI, and what kind of friction does it introduce to your practice? Like, how would you navigate or to resolve the tensions?
I feel like it's hard for me to say, but not every project that I work on, it's focusing or using like quote unquote AI. Again, like the big tech AI. So it really just depends on the project, the nature of the project. I describe my work primarily as post-digital and conceptual work. So again, it just depends on what I'm asking through the work and then what type of medium I'm going to use, if it even is going to focus primarily on technology. Um, and I guess like friction, kind of speaking back to what Ziv was saying, I feel like interrogating the friction is part of the process in my work, especially if I'm working with technology like AI and, you know, with developing ancestral intelligence as a framework, the whole point of that is to create friction or to create an alternative understanding to what AI is and questioning what, quote unquote, artificial intelligence, quote unquote, AI as an acronym is in the first place. And I guess that's how I'm navigating those tensions is by confronting them head on and making that integral part to the work and to the discussions and the frameworks I'm developing.
In my case, as I work a lot with game engines and world building, there's many times that you need a lot of objects, lots of assets inside of the level. So in this case, if I need many iterations on the same objects, let's say rocks, flowers, these kind of objects, AI comes very handy. So usually inside with the stable diffusion and with this Comfy UI, I can download different kind of diffusion models to create from images and then to 3D objects and then also even to sounds. You need many sounds when working also with games. This comes, I guess, when I'm on a technical level. But I also recently discovered, working with technology always feels a bit lonely. And it's nice if you're coming more from the creative side. It's also very interesting to team up with people that know specifically how to use these tools because it creates a way more richer kind of work, right? So I've been recently exploring to work with, for example, a programmer that works training these neural networks. So then you can directly shape how the kind of output that you want to achieve from a specific model, even if it's of course not as powerful as a company that makes their own model. It's way more ethical, and you can kind of fine tune a lot more the way that you work with AI. So I think yeah, team up with the programmers in case you're not an expert is always a good option. Yeah.
I also want to add to work. Oh, there's one thing I wanted to add in response with working with game engines and AI. Um, these generative processes on the back end of game engines have exist for years. And it's just now that we're starting to ask these questions about AI or have this tension with quote unquote AI because of this marketing scheme again that's being pushed towards and on us in the past 3 years. And how this marketing scheme or scam is being deployed by tech giants just to cash in. So I think again, it's like, what are we up against? It's the way that technology is being positioned to have access to resources to make a lot of money really quick. It's not necessarily the technology, again, that's bad. It's how it's being deployed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next student up, I think, is Elle.
Hello, my name is Elle, and I'm a second-year student at Parsons. I study strategic design and management. So my next question is going to be for Dominika and Ziv. So you both explained what designing with AI can mean. Dominika, you often focus on collective and community contexts, and Ziv, you bring in more than human and ecological perspectives. So how can AI become a medium for relationship building rather than just productivity or control? What would that shift ask of us as designers and researchers?
So for me, using AI as this relational sort of medium starts, and as I show in each of the workshop, with refusing the idea that technology must be efficient, productive, or optimized. Because in this work or in the participatory work, AI become less of a tool and more of a space that we like gather around and that we question together, maybe even misuse. And that thing, or like how to go there, is to treat people or people that come to the workshop or anyone not just as the recipients of what's going on, but as co-creators of these imaginaries, not just like to receive what we are seeing in the dominant, like from the dominant narratives, but just to actually try to imagine what could be the alternatives, what could be the other way. And also it requires these methods that are often messy and not super efficient, maybe emotional and maybe situated. And I would say, because I really was thinking about this question very hard, and it made me think that we should not be designing just for the outcomes, but for the ongoingness, or like for the maintenance, for friendships, and even for the refusal. And this, I'm not sure if it's answering, but made me think of like, if you don't want to be just about productivity, you cannot be also focusing on the products, on the end game, but also on what's going on in between, or like be like until you reach the product or the goal.
Yeah, I can tap on a little bit. I loved everything Dominika was saying. I think there's such a good way of kind of reframing interactions with these technologies. I wholeheartedly agree. At least for, a lot of the work I've been exploring, the kind of default way we interact with a lot of these systems is these chat interfaces where essentially you're like screaming at a black box. And that is like not an interaction paradigm that kind of leads to interesting agency, and people doing that alone and not having and kind of relying on it in these certain ways is this kind of like bad recipe. So ultimately, instead of us kind of prompting the models, I think it's really interesting to think about what does it look like to flip that paradigm on its head and actually have the models prompting us, right? So instead of kind of nudging us towards monoculture, how can our interactions with AI actually be enlightening for us to think about things that we hadn't thought about before? And that requires this kind of interpretive wedge where instead of kind of taking the model's outputs at face value for granted, instead it's kind of injecting that kind of criticality into those interactions, oftentimes in communities, in these social settings. I think the workshop work is super inspiring in that way to actually think about what is the kind of the human sauce here. Like, what is the interesting thing that it can help us realize is interesting for our own kind of communities and creative production more broadly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ziv and Dominika. I believe we have one more student question, so I'll hand it over to Victoria, and then if there are other questions from the audience, we can take those.
Hi, so my name is Victoria. I'm a third-year student at Parsons, and I'm studying design and technology. So my question now is for all four panelists. So right now, AI runs through nearly every layer of daily life. So like from social media and creative tools to communication systems and everyday infrastructure. So it expands what we can make and imagine, yet it also concentrates power in ways that shapes how we live and decide. So as AI becomes more embedded in our routines, what can help ensure that people maintain their agency as active decision makers rather than passive users?
That is a hard one because also there is this thing about putting responsibility on the people, which I really do not appreciate in general. But still, we should be able to do something so we can sleep at night. So what I'm thinking is just to stay critically curious and be involved. But also, you cannot do that at all times. We cannot all be fact checkers. We cannot all be doing that labor. And for that, what comes maybe it's the importance of empathy in the process of everything, and in general, being more mindful about the usage, and maybe in the terms of critical curiosity, also learn a bit about things and maybe also unlearn. But just to be a bit more interested, because now here, I guess in this room, people are interested, but if we go beyond, there's a lot of huge population that does not even care about this step, about having the agency. So what do we do with that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can quickly add to that for me, an interesting way to be more aware of it is to trace back the kind of physicality of this technology, to kind of see the traces or where all of these processes are actually happening, to understand that the cloud and everything, this cloud is a metaphor and everything happens at a cost of the earth consumption. And so kind of following the traces on how these technologies work can give us some more awareness on the kind of energy and resources that we are consuming. And yes, so I feel sometimes that it's like everything is transparent or in a gas state, no? So in this kind of being curious about the materiality of it, this is I guess one strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add to that as well. I feel like what has been helping me is to continue to be in conversations with other people who are thinking about it critically. Um, because again, I keep going back to how quote unquote AI isn't real and how it's been marketing to us. It's machine intelligence, machine learning, right? And so I think that it's helpful to ground that or to remind yourself of that. So, um, there was a few quotes in my presentation where I was referencing, reporters, writers, um, who are doing, a lot of research, having conversations with people who are involved in quote unquote AI and thinking about it critically. Um, so I just want to throw those again into, I guess, our conversation. Karen Howell, who wrote Empire of AI, I highly recommend, tapping into that. And also, Sanaa Bovell, I believe that's how you say her name. Um, she had recently said that most people think AI is an extension of the brain, but really it's an extension of our planet. And that was a conversation recently on her podcast that she recently started called I've Got Questions. And she's interviewing a bunch of different people who are involved in AI research, development, policy, etc., in many different aspects. And yeah, like I said, it's been really helpful for me to not feel defeated when, there's a new AI big tech headline, it can be overwhelming. But yeah, being involved and staying connected to people who are also being critical and thinking about how to continue to spread those conversations, it's also good.
Yeah, I love these answers. This is so interesting. I feel like for me, just maybe building on that, I do love this point about how there's the technology and then also there's these kind of extractive logics of these companies and kind of late stage capitalism more broadly. And I think in many ways, the upshot of this AI moment we find ourselves in is that a lot of these patterns of exploitation, of attention economy, of surveillance capitalism that we've been experiencing for a while now are kind of laid bare in this really profound way with generative AI. It's really just kind of in front of us. And now we have this monolith to like point to and like work with in this way. So I think this is a really interesting moment to kind of really wrestle with these dynamics that have been around forever, but these kind of big hegemonic models give us this kind of clarity of what are the stakes and the possibilities there. One metaphor I like for AI is that it's kind of adding a jetpack and a blindfold where you're going really fast, but you don't know where to see. You're kind of blind. So ultimately, in a world of going faster and gasoline, I think it's really about how do we learn to see, and how do we gain more perspective. And I think going back to the empathy point, right? What is the past? What is the future? How do we understand these things in a more humane, nuanced way if we're going to be using these accelerants in this way?
Thank you all for your insights. I know we're coming close on time. Xiaofan, what are your thoughts here?
Shall we open this up for the audience? If you have any questions to the panelists, feel free just to unmute yourself and speak directly, or you can drop in a chat and I can read it out for you.
Hello, I have a question for Jazsalyn and Ziv. Okay, I'm just going to read it out loud. Do you think that AI is being rediscovered from ancestral technologies and that AI is essentially a commodification of closed practice religions? To me, it looks like a form of technological religious fascism where these tech companies are reintroducing exoteric knowledge and commodifying it. And maybe this is a stretch, but thinking of Hilma Klint and her teacher Rudolf Steiner, who wrote about Saturn and it being a metaphysical old sun, there's so many connections with Saturn and black cubes. I can't help to think that these data centers are modern temples. And I wanted to see how far off is this theory.
I'm just gonna say no, they're not modeling this after ancestral technology. And I think that, that is actually part of the issue because it does lack empathy. It isn't, if it was, it would consider interconnectedness again between various life forms, ecosystems. So yeah, I'm gonna say flat out no, and that's part of the issue. And I wouldn't trust them to begin with. And that's why I think it's important to develop alternative AI, as referring to it as something that has already existed actually, but developing this framework and this movement behind it, and ways to imagine a different AI, quote unquote, future that's rooted in ancestral intelligence.
I think Jazsalyn nailed it.
Thank you so much. So we're about time, and I just want to close this panel with a comment pulled from the chat by Wawa. I'm just gonna read it out loud. My grandma always tell me the opposite of love is never hate, it is fear. After watching our guest lectures, it brought me so much hope and new perspectives. Even with this overwhelming bloom of AI world, as creatives, we still have choices and the power to make decisions for how we interact with AI, even how to make AI a bonding point with fellow creatives. Now I feel even more confident that together with our passion for creativity, we can make more beautiful things. Thank you so much for joining us with this panel, and thanks again to our amazing panelists, Joaquina, Ziv, Dominika, Jazsalyn, and we will be sharing the recording of this panel on YouTube, and we'll send it out through the Eventbrite email blast. And here are some quick links where you can find all those panelists' work. Feel free to take a screenshot, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much to everyone for joining and to our panelists for your insights. So grateful to have you here.
Thank you so much.
You.
You.
So much. See you later.